Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to my May TBR, which is going to be dominated by my participation in May of the Moderns. May of the Moderns is a reading event put together by Margaret Pinard. I'll leave a link to her channel and her announcement video down below, and to the first video she did in a series of videos which are going to discuss the prompts. This year, the prompts, she invited people to come up with prompts, and she invited me to do one, and I think that I undoubtedly have the most restrictive and the least interesting one of those prompts. But I wanted to participate in May of the Moderns because it's this kind of modern era of literature, particularly American literature, which is kind of my entry point into reading and really getting into reading when I was in college. So I want to make sure that I participated in that, and thank you to Margaret for hosting and for asking me to come up with a prompt. So I'll be talking about my May of the Moderns TBR here, as well as my other reading plans for this month. And I actually have one really kind of short review to do at the end of this video as well. So here we go. So there are 5 prompts for May of the Moderns: Sex, Timeless Black Classic, War, which was the one I came up with, End of Empire, and Translated. So I'm going to cheat just a little bit on this. So in a couple of ways. So for Sex, I'm going to reread Nightwood by Djuna Barnes. I read this, I think, 2 summers ago, and I put out a video called What the Hell Did I Just Read? And in that process, I promised to go back and reread the book to try to understand it better. Because a lot of people in the comments, told me, essentially, in a very nice way, told me that I was missing a lot of what made the book great, and I'm hoping that a reread will do that. Djuna Barnes is a noted lesbian during the time period, and if you don't know this, you should. Lesbians played a major role in promoting and creating as a part of the modernist movement, and if you haven't read No Modernism Without Lesbians by Dianna Souhami, you really should. It was just a great book, kind of an introduction. Not, tremendous amount of depth, but kind of introduction into the women who played a major role in kind of creating the modern movement, whether it was Sylvia Beach or Breyer, Natalie Barney, Gertrude Stein, HD is mentioned there, Hilda Doolittle. You might also pick up, even though it's not strictly speaking, about how lesbian women created the modern movement. You could also read Square Haunting by Francesca Wade, which I read. It's just an incredibly great book I read last year as well. So that's going to be my reading for the prompt of Sex. The second prompt is a timeless black classic. I've already started reading Cain by Toomer, which is kind of a lyrical novel thing. And I'm listening to it on audiobook, as I will be with a number of these books. I'm listening to it on audiobook, and I've listened to I'd say about a fourth of it right now, and it really is great. It is essentially almost like vignettes and semi-poems and lyrics that tell essentially the story of a multifaceted story, or give a multifaceted glimpse into life for African Americans, for Black Americans living in Georgia at the time in which it was written, which would have been the 1920s, 1930s actually, I think is when it was written, and I'm enjoying it very much. My prompt was War. War plays a major role in the development of the modernist movement. It really is after World War I that a lot of what we think of as modernist classics come into existence, even though Margaret is quite right in pointing out the modernist movement actually began before World War I. So I picked War, and my goal in War was, and my specific prompt was, to read a work written by someone who actually was a combatant during World War I. And Margaret came back and asked if we could make that broader to include nurses and other people like that. And I think that's fine, because without that, mine is the most restricted to the male point of view about World War I. But the reason why I wanted to do that is that I think a lot of the works we consider to be classic works about World War I, whether written by Hemingway or Dos Passos, a lot of those works are not actually written by combatants. Dos Passos and Hemingway were at the front evacuating wounded, and Hemingway was wounded. They certainly were in danger, but there is a real difference in the experience of the combatants in World War I. And their reflections on the war that is different and oftentimes far less romantic, particularly than someone like Hemingway's. view of war and society, and that's kind of what I wanted to get at. So for that, I'll be reading Under Fire by Henri Barbusse, or Barbusse, or Barbusse, or I can't, his last name is difficult for me to pronounce. I did look it up and now I've forgotten it, which is kind of a classic French work about World War I. I believe it was actually published before the war was over. So this will also count as a book I choose that's translated. It's translated from the French. But one of the things I thought might be interesting would be to read a book written by a combatant about World War I, and then a book written by a non-combatant about World War I. So I'm also going to read A Sun at the Front by Edith Wharton. This will only be my second Edith Wharton novel. And I don't believe A Sun at the Front is considered to be one of her best, but Edith Wharton was in France during World War I, and she actually visited frontline troops, and so she did have some first-hand knowledge of that experience, and so I thought it'd be interesting to read those two books. And then the fourth prompt is End of Empire, and so I'm going to read A Passage to India by E.M. Forster. This will be my third Forster novel, which is embarrassing for me to say, but I've had it for some time, and this is a really great reason to end it, or to read it, because it fits the prompt, but also because I think it really will show it really will show colonialist ideas of British citizens towards India, well into the 1920s, or maybe question those things. And then the fifth prompt was to read something that was translated, a translated classic. And so, again, I'm going to be reading At the Front by Henri Barbusse as my translated classic. But because I'm only reading, well, that's actually 5 books that I'm reading, if we include A Sun at the Front by Edith Wharton. But because I love the modernist period so much, I also took the advantage of this opportunity to read a work of nonfiction, which I intended to read for literally decades, and that is Everybody Was So Young, the story of Sarah and Gerald Murphy by Amanda Vail. And this is basically a biography of that couple who knew the Fitzgeralds and Hemingways and Dos Passos and others, and they were really a part of that lost generation, which is an area of real interest for me. So I'm going to read that. So I think that actually makes 6 books that I'm reading for May of the Moderns, even though technically reading a nonfiction book is not necessarily within the purview of the of May of the Moderns, but I'm going to do that. So that's my May of the Moderns TBR. I'm also going to be buddy reading a saga with Jack. It's the Volsunga, or the Volsunga. I've never read a saga. I always miss saga long, not because I'm excluded, but because I never remember, as I don't with most of these reading things. I never remember to jump in, and then when I do, by the time I think about it, I've probably already booked up. So I'll be buddy reading that, and we're going to get started on that this week. I also have 3 more BookTube prize books to read this month. I'm almost finished with the 4th, and I still haven't got my hands on copies of the other 2, so I've got to get that done. So that brings me up to what? That already brings me up to about 9 books, which is a lot for me in a month. I've also had a project to read the books on the Republic of Consciousness 22 long list, and I've ordered, I have one of those, and that's called The Beast That We Turned Away by Ryan Denis. I've read like the first 2 or 3 pages and then put it down. I also have on the way Our Lady of the Nile by Scholastique, Mukasonga, translated by Melanie Malthner, which I want to read. I believe that book made the short list, as did Songs of Youth by Montserrat Roy, which I read earlier and talked about in my wrap-up, or had a little bit about in my wrap-up that was in my Saturday video. And then also Somebody Loves You by Mona Arshi is on its way to me as well. That will bring me up to 6 of the 10 books that are on the long list. I do have plans to read the other. 2 of those are difficult for me to come up with. For some reason here in the United States, I have not been able to find a copy of Happy Stories Mostly, or another one of the titles, but I do hope to get to those. And then I just real quickly wanted to review a book that I read that was from the Republic of Consciousness Prize. And I read it really at the end of April, on April the 30th, April 29th, April 30th, but I didn't put it in with my wrap-up, so I thought I'd just mention it here. And that book is 5 Days Untold by Badr Ahmad. It was translated by Christian James. So that book basically is a book about the effects of war on a community and people, and how war creates all kinds of horrors and nightmares. It is a very violent book, but the kind of violence you expect from a book about war. It's fairly graphically described, even though, you know, I'm pretty sure I've read worse. It's possible, just as an old, you know, dude, I'm kind of numb to that kind of violence in books, but do be warned. It definitely takes place. There are sexual assaults, there are physical assaults, there are war, there's blood, there's entrails, there's suicide. There's a lot of violence in the book. I thought it was a really compelling read. There are essentially three timelines: one young man who goes off to war unwillingly, one corrupt government police official, and then the family of the young man who goes off to war unwillingly. And we check in on those three timelines on each of the 5 days in which the action takes place. I'll be honest with you, this for me was all about the plot. I didn't think there was very great. I didn't think the character development was great. The good character is good. The evil character is really evil, even though you do begin to have some sympathy for his situation. I thought it was really predictable. There wasn't any event which happened which, you know, I was surprised by. To be honest with you, I felt like I could predict every single thing that was going to happen, with kind of one notable exception. And then I had some issues with just the way which was translated, and this is going to sound like a silly Texas nitpicky thing, but the evil character is oftentimes has to go back and get his gun, which is described as a revolver. And then in one scene, they talk about him taking the clip out of the revolver. Well, you know, a clip is essentially a cartridge box that you can slide in and out of a gun. Revolvers don't really have clips. Now, there are speed loaders for revolvers where you can go ahead and load the bullets in and then push them into a revolver and have a speed loader. I don't think anybody referred to that as a clip. And once I noticed that, I noticed some other things that I thought were strange choices for translations, particularly some of the ways in which people were cursed. Son of an emaciated woman. I assumed that in the language from which this was translated, that carries deeper meaning than it does in English. So I thought there were some interesting and not so great translation choices. So for me, this book was just kind of like, okay, if you're interested in that book, in that kind of thing. By the way, the book is set in what is a Muslim country, but it's unnamed, and I assume that we're supposed to mean it's fictitious, even though the world events surrounding what takes place in this country, where the novelist said, are real ones. Anyway, I thought it was okay. I thought there were some parts of it that really kind of bring you in and make you want to keep reading, but a lot of the things that I look for in a novel really weren't there. Anyway, there you go. There's my May TBR +1 review. Look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.